Hello and welcome to the Green Profit Academy Pros podcast. This show digs into the challenges in growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit. I'm Christeen.
And I'm Steve Bousquet. We are the green industry experts in profit, growth, and leadership. Hello, Christeen. How are you today?
I am good. How are you doing?
I am excellent. Super excited about today's topic.
Yeah, me too. This is it's become one of my favorite topics. There was a time before I even pulled this whole concept together that talking about it was something that I dreaded because there were so many gaps. But now that I'm on the other side of it, I absolutely love to talk about this.
Yeah, I think you have a great handle on this. It's a really high level business, but it's needed. And I think, when a business can get to this level, it's really when a business can excel at another level, right? Whether it's a small business, even if it's a solopreneur or a small business, or especially a large business, right? So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about mastering growth with the scalable growth business model dashboards. In a competitive realm like lawn care and the landscape businesses, right? Achieving scalable and maintaining profitability are important to maintaining long-term success. As businesses evolve, the distinction between mere growth and strategic scaling becomes increasingly critical, highlighting the necessity for tools that not only guide expansion, but also safeguard profitability are crucial to the business's long-term success.
Yes. Very good, Steve. Yeah. So the scalable growth business models. So interestingly enough, I had been working on this pretty much through, my whole journey of entrepreneurship and working with businesses to where the business owner or, the person running the business would say, how much should I spend on this? What should I spend on that? Like, what does this look like? Am I spending the right amount? So there are all these questions. And I had been, kind of working on pulling this together. And many, many years ago in a group setting, there was a conversation that was being had. And I kind of talked about this and threw it out there, I think the first time in a group setting. And I remember Steve's face lighting up and saying, that would be amazing to know that this information and, where is the development of this? And I said, well, it's really in the early stages. I had a lot of kind of the concepts developed, but hadn't put it together. And so the scalable growth business models I introduce in chapter 8 of the Profit First for Lawn Care and Landscape Businesses book. And I really think it's a groundbreaking tool where it really breaks down how much you spend. So these dashboards are really designed to steer you and your business through the complexities of expansion. And they help you lay the foundation for profitability. So it's really about being intentional about scaling and growing your business and expanding your business and moving, from one revenue tier to another without sacrificing your profit.
So I actually remember where we were. We were in Louisiana and we were at a retreat, and I asked the question. You had said something, and I was like, oh, it's like, what if you knew exactly how much to spend at every single level of business that you were at in every single function of your business at every time, right? And that would be the magic formula, because what's the difference between growth and scalability, right? Well, growth is sales, right? It's a number that we reach, but what is scalability? And we're going to go over that. And this is why the dashboard is so important, because scalability is the 5 functions of business, right? It's how our business grows. It's what our business needs to sustain.
Yeah. And I think it's a critical association, right? Because it's like business owners, entrepreneurs, we move really fast. We have distractions. There's all these things going on. And we really need to make time to work on our business, which if you were listening to our podcast, we talked about that just a little bit ago. But when we're looking at the difference between growth and scaling your business, and I think this is the important to identify, like, what is the difference? Growth, we're increasing, size, and reach, right? So you might be expanding your market, like Steve said, increasing revenue. But strategic scaling is different, where that's enhancing the business's capacity and efficiency as it grows. So that has to be in place. So building out that solid foundation in order to really support the growth and the long-term sustainability and profitability of the business. And if you don't do that, you're going to end up taking steps backwards. And we have seen this happen in businesses to where, their revenue goes up by millions of dollars, and then suddenly they start seeing this decline in revenue, and they're not understanding why is the business declining? Why are we taking these steps back when we obtained all this growth? And what we discover is that foundation wasn't built properly. So, the systems and processes were identified and put in place to support that growth. So it's kind of, Steve, you said many times, sometimes we have to slow down to go fast. This is part of that. Growth can happen really fast. Scaling your business is something, that takes a little bit of time and intention.
Right. So we get all excited. We know how to, right? As entrepreneurs, right? When we first start the business up, there's two things we know how to do: sell it and get it done, right? We know how to sell the work and get the work done. But what we're lacking is the support side of the business, the financial side of the business, right? The cash flow side, and the other, like the finance side, the management of all the other parts of the money in the business, and also the system side of the business, the hiring, the onboarding, the HR side, the system, inventory management, right? One of the worst things that almost all businesses are, even large businesses, is they're horrible at is inventory management. But as businesses grow, that's a crucial part of it. HR is a crucial part of it, right? We have onboarding, training. We have our emerging leader or our leadership development, right? Such an important part of it. Our mission, vision, immutable laws, our purpose, all those things are important to develop. And that's part of our scalable model, right? And also, how much do we need to spend on each one of those components? We just can't start throwing money at it. So as entrepreneurs, we're really good at sales and then getting work done and then throwing money at problems.
Yeah, and the money that you're throwing is your profit, right? So we want to be intentional about how much money we throw at something, and we want to protect that profit in the business.
Yeah, just winging money, and then like, oh, how are we going to pay for taxes, and then how are we going to pay for this, and yes,
yeah,
and how are we going to pay ourselves?
Right, because that's important as well. So the overview, I just kind of want to unpack this, of the scalable growth business model, is it's a table where it provides a very concise revenue tier, by revenue. So it's a revenue range. And if you're familiar with the profit first methodology, that was something that I kind of modeled this table kind of towards, because it was very easy for people to understand. So I've seen that people understand the concept of profit first when they're looking at the revenue tiers and they're looking at their target allocation percentages and their current allocation percentages. So I figured that would be a very easy dashboard to kind of put that in. So what we're really doing is we're looking at your total revenue range, and then we're utilizing your gross profit margin as your driving KPI. So that's the simplicity of it. It's a table that's laid out in revenue ranges, and then you're driving your growth as your gross profit margin as your driving KPI, and everything else, the percentages in that revenue range, kind of fall in place to keep you within the guidelines of what you should spend that's healthy.
And it feels a little bit different as you enter each one of these levels. It could feel a little bit different depending on how long you've been in business for. And the quicker you move through each level, it could also feel a little bit different. So the longer you've been in business, if you're building up that profit vault, it's going to feel a little bit different than if you're speeding your way through these different levels and you're not building up as much of a profit vault. There's going to be a little bit more vulnerability. You can still go through them quickly. It's just not going to be, you're not going to have as much of that profit vault because it's a time. Time builds value, right? So just know that it's not going to be the same for everyone. It's going to depend on where you're at and the life cycle of, or the stage of your business. So, and we've had people ask us, accountants, they're like, how did you come up with these numbers? And how come they're not the same at the very beginning, at the end? And that's because they're fluid, and the business is going to go through that change as you're experiencing this growth and scalability.
Right. And that's what, I wanted to take into consideration because of the conversations that we did have with business owners in different business models, and the feedback that we were getting and how the business model was behaving, I should say, with the financials. There were businesses that were different, and we couldn't, make it this very complicated table. We had to make it as simple as possible. So you'll see, if you look at the table, if you have the book or you've downloaded the PDFs or in the toolbox that we have at Green Profit Academy, you'll see that there's ranges there. And the ranges are there to support, what Steve is talking about is depending on your business model and, what are you spending? And one of the things that came up, and you might be very aware of this, is if you have a business that uses large equipment to produce your revenue, your equipment spend is going to be higher than your labor, because your men aren't out there, your people aren't out there in the field doing, all the work. Your equipment is doing more work. So you're going to have higher spend on equipment, and vice versa. There's, if you don't use large equipment, but you still have the job to do, you're going to have more labor. So that's kind of what we're considering to this range, to where it's suitable for somebody to look at and go, okay, I'm going to have a lower percentage. Maybe it's a 5% spend on equipment. And then, the higher end of, 35 to 40% spend on labor. And that tells me that your business model utilizes your team and not as much equipment. But where we find that sweet spot on, are you spending a healthy amount, is, your equipment's lower, your labor's higher in percentage, but that gross profit margin is still within that range.
And that's the most important thing, is gross profit margin. Because what's interesting is, at Profit First Mastery, I was interviewing people that own accounting firms, right? And asking about gross profit margins, and they're, in their accounting world, their ranges of spend on their labor, right? And they have the same kind of ranges, right? They have lower equipment spend, but they have higher labor spends. So it's all the same. It's a different business industry, but it's the same kind of percent model, right? So all business, regardless of the business, has inputs, expenses to generate outputs, revenues.
Right. And that, where we really want to keep track, is that gross profit margin, when it all shakes down to the bottom.
That's the key. It's all gross profit margin. All businesses have gross profit margins.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because as we were rolling this out, like, I've worked in the trade industries, since the beginning, working in trades. And we had people come to us that owned, businesses that were not lawn care, landscape businesses, irrigation, that were not in the specific industry. And they said, hey, how does the scalable growth business model work that you unpack in chapter 8 in the book? How does it work for this type of company or that type of company? And we found it was actually very similar to where these percentages served that trade industry. And the reason why is because equipment is expensive, right? They're spending money on equipment too. Some of the equipment they have to, like, let's take an insulation company. They have to build out a truck very similar to a company that has to build out a lawn application truck. So, they have to customize this. They have to make sure it works. They have a system there. And then at the same time, they pay their technicians around the same wage. So it was very relative. And this is just an example to another business in the trade industry. So the scalable growth business model, it serves the trades. If you're a lawn or landscape company, irrigation, it's just in the book. In chapter 8, I really focused it on the lawn and landscape industry. So we're looking at the different types of business models in this industry to where it's, the one trick pony. Are you just providing one service? Are you the 3-ring circus to where you're kind of doing a handful of the spectrum that this industry serves, from landscape, snow removal, irrigation, anything around that. And then we also looked at whether you're a year-round service model or if you kind of switch services depending on what your focus is. Do you do irrigation and lawn application during the summer and landscape, and then in the wintertime you're switching to snow removal. So we took the biggest pinch points with the business models in the lawn and landscape industry, and we built out the scalable growth business model dashboards to where it just makes it easier for you to go to and go, oh, well, I'm a one trick pony and I service all year round, or I'm a 3-ring circus and I shift, during the season, or I shut down during the season.
I had Steve with Green Profit Academy. I was just reading a Harvard Business Review study that showed people who have written down goals and plans make 10 times more money over a 10-year period than people who don't write their goals and plans down. And really, that's why I'm so excited to announce the Green Profit Academy Mind Your Own Business Retreat. This is going to be the 3rd retreat we're putting on. It's going to be held in Granville, Tennessee at the Wildwood Resort and Marina. It's going to be on November 4th to November 8th. And we're going to work on not only your 1 year, but your 1 to 5 year business plan and goals. So you're going to be so far ahead of people who don't have written down goals and plans. We are doing this because we want your business to be far more successful than you ever imagined. And it all starts with goals and plans. So join us this year, November 4th to November 8th, for the Mind Your Own Business Retreat. Let's see. Come on, sign up. I'm going to put the link to sign up in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you there. It's time to get serious about your business. Now's the time to start. And that is really important to break this out because of capital resource or capital input. Because if you're doing snow in the winter, right, that snow money is going to, that snow capital that's going to sit there. A lot of all your plows, if you're using your plows, your skid steers, salters, just for the snow season. So you're going to have a higher expense for your equipment because, those plows are sitting there. Basically, you're going to use them from this, beginning of December and in November into maybe the end of March, beginning of, April. So for 8 months, they just sit there collecting dust or rust and not cash. So, but they have to be paid for, right? So there's expense with that. Also, there's higher repairs on all your equipment. So even if you're using your trucks during the green season, if you're plowing with those trucks, you're going to have higher repairs during that. So, most of the time, a green side industry business is going to have between 5 to 6.5% expense. But if you're using snow equipment, most of the snow businesses are going to have between 8.5 to 9% expense for green side plus the snow. So they're going to have a much higher expense. So you're going to just have to charge more of your revenue is going to be equipment. So you're going to have to charge more. And also, even if you are a green side but you're three-ring circus, you're going to have equipment that sits there and you're going to have to pay for that. So you have to charge more than if you're the one trick pony. So like if you do leaves and you have a truck loader that sits there, you're going to use it 6-7 weeks, maybe in the fall, but it's a $10,000 truck loader. You're going to have to pay for that. So there's a lot of iron that sits in rust that has to get paid for. So, and we need to make sure that that's in our budget. And if you're scaling or growing the business and you have multiples of these, right, that has to get paid for.
Yeah. And that right there, the kind of things that you're talking about to consider in the business model, if we follow the scalable growth business model percentages of spend and we're smart about it, we make sure that the gross profit margin is dialed in, you're going to be able to make informed decisions. You're going, when those things come up and you say, oh, well, do we add this service to the business, right? Like you're talking about some of that, the fall services. And I know you have a great story about a bark blower, right? And every time I come to your shop and I see that bark blower and I think of this story every time. And, if you had the scalable growth business model, Steve could have made an informed decision on whether or not to buy that bark blower and then what he would have had to have charged for it based off of his revenue tier at that time.
Right. Yeah. So, the bark blower back in 1998 was about $33,000. This is the trailer unit. And you basically, cannot blow enough bark to pay for it, right? You'd have to charge almost $70 an hour and done so many yards. I think it was about 1,000 yards a year at $70 an hour. I can't remember the math off the top of my head, but it's almost impossible. And so we didn't do enough to do that. So it takes a lot of years to pay for that. And if you're making payments for it, you're basically taking money out of your profit to pay that because you got to pay for it over a 5-year period. But really, it takes almost 15 years to pay for it. So after 15 years, you're making money. But who wants to wait 15 years to make money on something? That's probably not a good business decision. So we want to know this ahead of time. So hence the growth business model.
Yeah. Yeah. And what this does is it provides that financial clarity that you need to make informed decisions to know that you're scaling efficiently. Right. So it's like you have the understanding of the company's financial. You're looking at the revenues, you're looking at the spend when it comes to your labor, to your equipment, to your off season. Right. So it's like we have that seasonal business model to where it shifts into seasons, or maybe it's a slower season or you shut down. Are you saving enough of your revenue when you are making money to allocate towards that down season or that flex season that I talk about? So it allows you as a business owner, you and your leadership team, to make informed decisions on how to allocate resources, right? That risk management that you've probably heard us talk about several times. You've heard me talk about if you watch the webinars as well, where I'm talking about how do we manage risk in the business? What does that look like? What does that mean? And even growth planning. So how are you going to scale and grow the business without losing that traction that you worked so hard for? So you're really getting the scalable growth business model in place so you can maintain and optimize your growth over time. And you don't take, those steps backwards, because that can be deflating for any entrepreneur or business owner.
The other thing with the scalable growth business model is it lets us, it shows when to start adding additional people. And I think that's one of the bigger things. Like people want to start adding salespeople and admin and all this. Well, way too early, way too soon. And the scalable growth business model shows you when you can start adding other people to start doing your job, right? Whether it's sales or admin or what that is. And when you have a company of X size, let's say it's under $2 million, you can't really have 3 salespeople. You're up until $2 million, or, you're the salesperson, right? So, you can have an admin at $1 million, or $500,000, you can have part-time admin. But so it even lets you know when you can start hiring people and what they have to do. You can have people that can sell and produce, or you sell and produce up to $1 million. But when it even helps you understand when you become the full-time salesperson, or when there is a full-time salesperson needed outside of you. So it also helps with that type of structure.
Yeah. And that's where I feel, it's another profit bleed in the company. And we find this with, clients we've worked with, to where they don't have the right crew size, or, they have they have enough people to run, let's say, a $15 million company, and they're still at like $12 million. So they're overspending by about $3 million, of revenue. So relative to cost to revenue, they're overspending based off of their current business size. And just being aware of that, right? That's what I call like being behind the system, to where it's like you're spending too much money based off of your revenue. And I know, Steve, you have another saying for it, too much month for the end of the money, to where, yeah, there's just nothing left. And so it helps you get in front of that. So that way you have the money to spend and expand the business before you need it. And that's the intention. And it also helps with the percentages. If you're really dialing in that gross profit margin, it gives you that permission to spend and protecting that profit margin at a healthy level, and then level up to a higher profit margin as you're, going into the next revenue tier.
Yeah, and understanding how much you have to spend is crucially important at every single level. And you can't have, right, if you're not understanding your gross profit margin and where you're at, right, you end up with too much month at the end of the money, which means you can't pay your bills. So what happens is we borrow money, right? We take out loans, credit cards, whatever it is to meet those demands, those liabilities. And then you do it 1 month, another month, another month. And then next thing you know, we start having sales to increase. We have a fire sale or sales and discounts to increase sales to meet these loans. So now we're reducing profits to make payments, and it gets really ugly really fast. So understanding that where we should be with our, model size to our scalability is crucially important. And like, if you have a $12 million company, but your structure's at 15 million, right? It doesn't take many quarters, to get upside down very quickly.
Yeah. And this is where, when you start spending your profit to where you don't have profit. And then 2, you start accumulating debt. And I think, and that's the whole point of the profit first system, right? Is to make sure you're profitable, make sure you don't have debt. Bringing in the scalable growth business model, it helps you be very intentional about safeguarding that gross profit margin, and giving you more transparency in like where you should spend and when you should spend it. And I think that that's a really important point, as to where it doesn't take too many quarters, like you said, Steve, to where, we don't have enough money. And now what are we going to do? It's been, we haven't been hitting our sales revenue, whatever it is, right? And then we're spending all this money to support a business at this level when we're really here. It helps you avoid something like that happening, to where you're putting in the systems and processes. You're looking at, well, how much team do I need to produce this revenue, which also supports team burnout, which I think is really important. We've talked about team engagement so many times on our podcast. And I think as leaders, we need to be very mindful not to burn out our team, which means they're looking to us to know when it's right, to add a crew. We don't want to wait too long. And we also don't want to add costs too soon.
Right. And that's what the scalable growth business model lets us know when we're going to be adding that crew. We should be able to see that revenue tier coming up, at least 2 quarters ahead of time.
Yeah. And I've also worked with clients to get it, really dialed in to where we look at, strategies on how to spend their money. So as they're scaling and growing the company, we can look at how much money they have and we can decide, how are you going to spend the cash in your business? And would it be better, to finance something? Because we've talked about this before, right? Is it going to produce revenue for you? Okay, what does that look like? What's the percentage rate if you finance it versus the cash you have in the bank? Because you've all heard the term before, cash is king, right? And it's very hard to strategize unless, you're either really good with money, have a finance degree, or maybe you're working with a really good, CFO, to be able to strategize how to use that cash. And that alone can be extremely stressful, is how do we utilize the cash in the business to gain the traction that we need that serves our goals around growth and scalability. And I think in today's market, especially in economy, we really want to be mindful about the decisions we make when it comes to debt and that we make when it comes to growth and spending money.
Yes, sustainability is always number one, right? Sustainability, protect the company at all costs, right? Because it's not if, it's when something's going to attack or become difficult in the company. So we want to make sure, and I think the whole COVID crisis taught us that. There's something that's going to happen outside of our control that we're going to have to go through. So we want to make sure that we're prepared for that. Okay, so we're coming to part one, the end of part one of the Scalable Growth Business Model podcast. And we want to thank you for joining us on part one. And we look forward to you joining us on part two. Thanks for listening to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast,
the show that digs into the challenges of growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit.